Greetings. This is to be a lecture on cosmological arguments. It's a follow-up to the lecture on ontological arguments that ideally, if you're following things sequentially, I should have given that previously. And it'll borrow some of the terms we talked about there, but it's a different sort of way of trying to prove the existence of God. So this is, in a module, we're talking about evidential arguments for the existence of God or evidential arguments for theism. And again, these are various attempts to prove that the proposition God exists is true. So with having said that, let me begin by sharing my screen. And what screen do I want to share? I guess this one. Try that. Okay, if I did this correctly, you should be looking at a screen that says Cosmological Arguments, an Overview. Hold on, I seem to be getting a phone call. No matter, it was potential spam. All right, so Cosmological Arguments, an Overview. This isn't working. Why not? So there are really two issues here, right? One question is, what is the cosmological argument for the existence of God? And a related but different question is, what is a cosmological argument at all? And in particular, what is a cosmological argument for the existence of God? So typically, cosmological arguments attempt to prove that something exists, a previously unknown, perhaps overlooked something, and then they go on to identify that something with God. And they say, oh, here's this thing which must exist as a matter of metaphysical necessity, and this thing is God. But that's really two different steps, right? To prove the existence of something, and then to identify that something with God. St. Thomas Aquinas is characterized as having skipped over this gap when, after concluding his argument from motion and demonstrating that there must be an unmoved mover, he asserts, and that all men call God. Wait a minute, someone said, even if you have established the existence of an unmoved mover or an uncaused cause, etc., how do we know that that thing is God? How do we know that thing is personal or conscious or cares about the affairs of the world or humankind? How do we know that it's moral or intelligent? There's not only a gap, but a huge gap facing one who tries to prove the existence of a necessary being, let's say, and the existence of the O God that we talked about previously. Now, while the gap is legitimate, that particular criticism of Aquinas is not. Here, Aquinas was merely stating a point of historical fact, a fact that Aristotle himself suggests, which is that all people who have considered the unmoved mover argument and related ones have gone on to conclude that that unmoved mover must be God. So he's merely stating as a matter of historical fact that this thing, the unmoved mover, all men have subsequently gone on to call God. Nevertheless, as William Rowe, contemporary 20th century philosopher, I think he's passed now, and others have pointed out that it's one thing to prove the existence of an unmoved mover or an uncaused cause, but it's another thing to demonstrate that that thing or that being is God with a capital G and in the singular, and still another to demonstrate that that being is the God or an object of worship that we might find in the Bible. Rowe refers to these two distinct projects as cosmological argument phase one, that would be the proving the existence of this metaphysical item, and cosmological argument phase two, identifying that metaphysical item with deity or God. So we're going to first start by setting the table. And by that, I mean, we're going to cover some terms that will be useful to us as I lay out the cosmological arguments that we'll be examining. First, modal terms, and second, the notion of an infinite regress. So let's do modal terms first. To appreciate how cosmological arguments are supposed to work, it is necessary to understand a certain number of modal terms. Modals, these are words that express modalities, qualify a state of affairs or a way of being. For example, the statement John is happy might be qualified by saying that John is usually happy, in which case the term usually is functioning as a modal. The modal terms we're principally interested in here are necessary, contingent, possible, and impossible. Necessary things would be things the non-existence of which is not possible. These are things that cannot not be. Contingent things are things that could either be or not be. So their existence is possible, but not necessary. Possible things would be anything which does exist or could exist. And impossible things would be anything which simply could not exist. Now, this is a little complicated, but William Rowe gives us an interesting, helpful way of dividing these up. And he invites us to imagine a column, a list of things which exist and things which don't exist. So he invites us to imagine this double-sided list. On one side, we have things that exist, and on the other side, we have things which do not exist. So here's such a column. On the left-hand side, we have things that exist. On the right-hand side, we have things that do not exist. So we see on things that do exist, things like the Empire State Building, the planet Mars, dogs, Justin Bieber, triangles, maybe Anselm's God. I have question marks over those. Things that do not exist would be things like unicorns and mermaids, living dinosaurs, the Fountain of Youth, Saint Anselm, no longer is with us, I'm afraid. Round squares or married bachelors. But notice I've divided these columns into two rows, row A and row B. And notice there's an important difference between the items that find themselves in row A and the items that find themselves in row B. The items in row A can, in a sense, switch sides. And what I mean by that is the Empire State Building is on the exists side, but it wasn't always on the exist side. Before it was built, it was on the non-exist side. And we could imagine at some point in the future that it might again return to the non-exist side. So the Empire State Building can switch sides. And that's true for all of the items in row A. Unicorns don't exist, but had evolution gone differently, they could have existed. Living dinosaurs don't exist at this time, although I saw this interesting documentary about where they found dinosaur DNAs and then they replicated it and created this whole island of dinosaurs, so living dinosaurs. I think it was a documentary, maybe not. On the other hand, Justin Bieber, he's with us now, thank goodness, but you know, there may come a time where he's on the non-exist side. So in row A, these things can switch sides. But notice the items in row B cannot switch sides. That is, while married bachelors do not exist, there is no way that it is possible for a married bachelor to exist. Or a round square. No, it doesn't exist, but it couldn't exist. The question is whether or not triangles, let's say, exist. Could they fail to exist? Might they be necessary things? Or likewise, might God be a necessary thing? So we'll talk about that in a moment. In the former cases, A, their existence or non-existence is what's called contingent, right? In other words, they are on one side, but they could be on the other side. Which side they're on is contingent. Now, contingent upon what? Well, that varies. History, evolution, laws of physics, etc. But in the latter case, their existence is either necessary, not contingent on anything, or impossible. That again means not contingent on anything. So here we have the four concepts that we're trying to get some purchase on: necessary, contingent, possible, and impossible. So take a moment and ask yourself, in what of the four quadrants would you find necessary things? In which of the four quadrants would you find contingent things? In which of the four quadrants would you find possible things? And in which of the four quadrants would you find impossible things? I'll give you a moment to sort that out. Okay, we're done. Well, hopefully you've done this. Necessary things would be in 1B. They exist and they couldn't fail to exist. Contingent things would be in 1A and 2A, right? They could switch sides. So anything which is on the exist side but could switch is contingent, and anything which is on the not exist side and could switch would be contingent. Possible things would be anything in quadrants A1, A2, or B1. In other words, anything which does exist or could exist. And then that leaves us the impossible things. Impossible things are in quadrant B2. Not only do they not exist, they couldn't exist. Now, philosophers do not all agree on the criteria for asserting that something is possible or impossible. In other words, what goes in which box and why. So there's differing of opinions among philosophers as to what goes in which box and why that is. Modern philosophers, philosophers of our era, usually have in mind what they call logical possibility, that which is conceivable without logical contradiction, the sort of possibility David Hume talks about. But that may not be the same thing as metaphysical possibility. Again, what is logically possible is what is conceivable without logical contradiction. But Plato and Aristotle had a much richer notion of metaphysical necessity or contingency. Their notions of necessity or contingency was grounded in their notions of formal and final causality, something we may talk about later. But a thing's essence determines what it's possible for it to achieve and what it is impossible for it to achieve. So, for instance, they would say that it is metaphysically impossible for me to breathe underwater. Why? Because I'm not the sort of thing that can breathe underwater. My essence, my humanity, does not include within it the potentiality for breathing underwater. Now, it is possible for me to learn French. Why? Because my nature, my essence, permits me to learn other human languages. So my nature determines what it is possible or metaphysically impossible for me to attain or to achieve. But that's a richer notion of possibility than logical possibility. Nevertheless, this table, the one I had up a moment ago, still works regardless of how you understand the mechanism of possibility. Now, some philosophers claim that quadrant 1B is empty. In other words, they claim there is no such thing as a necessary being, as something which exists and couldn't fail to exist. David Hume is one such individual because he says, anything I can conceive of as existing, I can equally well conceive of as not existing. So I could imagine it as being, or I could imagine it as not being, and therefore there is nothing which is logically necessary to exist. So he would be one individual who thinks that quadrant 1B is empty. Cosmological arguments, on the other hand, claim that there must be something in 1B. There must be a necessary thing, a necessary being, and that's something all men call God. Happy face, right? Well, again, we kind of go to that conclusion. But that would be the phase 2 part of the cosmological argument. A second thing for setting the table, understanding those modal terms, we're good with that now, hopefully, is the notion of an infinite regress. There is a story told by Stephen Hawking in his book, A Brief History of Time, where a cosmologist's speech is interrupted by a lady in the audience who claims that the universe rests on the back of a giant tortoise. The scientist gives a superior smile before replying, what is the tortoise standing on? And the old lady shoots back, oh, you're very clever, young man, very clever, said the old lady. But it's turtles, 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 all the way down. But that's the problem of it, infinite regress. A turtle cannot support something else, say the universe, unless the turtle itself is supported. But that can't be the end of the story. Supported things supported by other supported things. If anything supports anything else, then in addition to supported supporters, there must be something different, something which provides support, but does not itself need to be supported, an unsupported supporter. Put another way, can it be the case that everything that supports is itself supported by another thing? No, because that would lead to an infinite regress, the logical consequence of which is nothing is supported. But the claim nothing is supported is obviously false. So any position that logically entails it must rest on at least one false assumption. This is essentially the reductio ad absurdum of Thomas Aquinas's third way, his third argument for the existence of God, which we'll talk about later. But this is not just seen in metaphysics. Aristotle and Aquinas employ it in metaphysics, but also in ethics as well. Philosophers make a distinction between what they call things of intrinsic value and things of instrumental value. A thing has instrumental value if it is valuable as a means to some other end. I think the best example of something with instrumental value is money. Does money have value? Oh, yes, I'm getting paid on Friday. I'm very much looking forward to that. And I value money. But why do I value money? Well, I value money because of the things I can do with it. It's an instrument. It's a tool by which I can acquire other things. To say that a thing has intrinsic value, by contrast, is to say it's valuable in and of itself, just because it is what it is, just because it has the character it has. But notice, if anything has instrumental value, in other words, if anything is instrumentally valuable as a tool to something else, then there must be something of intrinsic value. There is something which bestows value, but does not need to borrow it from something else. Notice it cannot be the case that everything has value as a means to something else. In addition to those things you value as means, say money, there must be something you value as an end in itself and not merely as a means. The thing of instrumental value has no value on its own, so it must be getting its value from somewhere else. It has derivative value, but if anything has derivative value, then there must be something of non-derivative value. Now, this is fairly abstract, but imagine I said I was going to give you $1 million. And he said, oh, yes, Professor Harris, thank you very much, $1 million. I said, okay, I'm going to give you $1 million, but you can't use it for anything. What? Well, you can't spend it, and you can't put it in the bank and get interest, and you can't use it as collateral for a loan. What would be the point then? There wouldn't be. There would be no point in having $1 million if you couldn't use it for something else. Having $1 million has no intrinsic value. It only has instrumental value. It's a means to an education, or it's a means to medicine. It's a means to food or entertainment or shelter, etc. But it's instrumentally valuable, not intrinsically valuable. But the mere fact that anything has instrumental value, say money, demonstrates that there must be something of intrinsic value. And then the only question remaining would be, what is that thing of instrumental value? What is it that is valuable for itself, merely because it is what it is, merely because it has the character it has? What Aristotle and Aquinas invite us to do is figure that out. Figure out what is it that has intrinsic value, and then make sure that we have ordered our life in the appropriate way so that we are efficiently pursuing that thing which is of genuine value. And we're selecting those things which are useful means to that thing we value for itself. A thing of non-derivative value is the only thing that can keep the whole system of valued things from collapsing, or perhaps more accurately, from ever getting started in the first place. And further note that this is not a temporally first value. It's not because I valued something a long time ago that something has value today. No, if something has instrumental value today, then there must be something of intrinsic value today. So again, this is a vertical cosmological argument. It's temporally contemporary, right? It must be at this time simultaneously providing value for it to have the value it has. So moving on. Oh, and so notice the uncaused cause would have to be something like that. That which is causing things today, not once upon a time, a long time ago. That's a horizontal Kalam cosmological argument. But what the vertical cosmological argument wants to be saying is that there must be something which is causing the universe right now, just as there is something of intrinsic value which is giving instrumental values their value right now. All right, so now we move on to what is a or the cosmological argument. First, the indefinite article is inappropriate, and the definite article, let's try that again. First, the indefinite article is appropriate, and the definite article is not. There is no one cosmological argument, but rather it's a family of related arguments under this umbrella, if you will, the umbrella of cosmological arguments. So within this family, there are three broad divisions. And indeed, one subgroup sort of fights with the other two, sort of. But before talking about their differences, let's examine what they have in common. A cosmological argument begins by observing the world around us, the cosmos, hence cosmological argument. So notice it is an empirically based argument. It is not an a priori argument the way the ontological argument was. So the ontological argument was not based on observation. It was based on merely logical truths and logical deduction. The cosmological argument is based on empirical, is empirically based. It's based on observation. The cosmological argument begins with some obvious, unassailable, observable fact about the world, such as things exist. It then argues that the ultimate cause of or explanation for those things' existence has to be some transcendent thing, some supernatural and not of the natural order thing. And it has, or they have, some property that only God-type things could have. So it begins with what is observable, but it tells us that when we look at the observable world, it leads us inextricably to posit that which is not observable, that which transcends the observable world, right? This sort of cosmological principle. Now, these types of arguments go back at least as far as Plato and have been used by notable philosophers and theologians ever since the days of Plato, even into contemporary times. But one important difference between this set of arguments would be the difference between what I've called the vertical and the horizontal cosmological arguments. These names indicate the direction from which the explanation or cause for the feature being explained comes. Is it directly vertical? Right now, it's being caused. Or is it horizontal at some point in the past? There was something which is explaining or causing something in the present. These are the differences between the two. The horizontal version claims that the cosmos had to have some cause or explanation some time ago, sometime in the past. The vertical form argues that every created, moved, or caused thing is being created, caused, or moved right now. So again, that it's simultaneous with its cause. Now, the horizontal arguments are a little easier to understand since they don't require very much in heavy metaphysical thinking. The basic argument can be put in the form of a syllogism. The contemporary philosopher and theologian William Lane Craig favors this particular version. And it says, all things had beginning, try that again, all things that had beginnings had to have causes. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause. Now, once we know that the universe had a cause, then we can deduce certain qualities about that cause, qualities that are of the sort of God type. For instance, that cause of the universe must be outside space and time, and yet be responsible for space and time. Why? Well, because space and time exist because of that cause, so that cause can't be part of space and time. Similarly, that cause can't be material. Since material reality was caused by it, it cannot itself be material or of material reality. Now, someone might say that some things are caused by other things, and so perhaps the cause of the universe itself had a cause, and so on, and so on, and so on. But that wouldn't solve the problem. Because notice, if you suppose that the cause of the universe was caused itself, well, then that raises the question, and what caused that? So you're just beginning the infinite regress anew. The only thing that can terminate the infinite regress of caused causes would be an uncaused cause. This is because caused causes had to have causes too, and this cannot go on forever. Such an explanatory model would result in an infinite regress, which we've already talked about, and thus fail to cause or explain anything at all. The only things that can stop an infinite regress would be an uncaused cause or uncaused causes. And that all men call God. Okay. Now, why should we think that the second premise of the syllogism is true? Why should we think that the universe had a beginning? Well, today we have some science that seems to support that second premise. Specifically, the Big Bang theory seems to suggest that the universe is not infinitely old, but is only finitely old, perhaps something like 14 billion years old. But philosophers have offered philosophical arguments for this position prior to the claims of modern physics. The universe, they say, cannot be infinitely old, according to this version of the cosmological argument, because such a picture would commit us to the existence of a completed infinite set. But the very notion of a completed infinite set is paradoxical. Any set has to be finite. All series are finite or limited by definition. All series have two endings in actuality, an end at the beginning and an end at the end. So no matter how large a series is, it's going to be a finite series, not an infinite series. But if there were no temporally first cause, the argument goes, then the chain of causes would never have started. Therefore, there is at least at the beginning a first cause, one that had no beginning, a first uncaused cause, and this we suggest is God. Now, there's general agreement that this version of the cosmological argument finds its origin in an Alexandrian commentator and Christian theologian, John Philoponus, and then it was later taken up by Islamic Kalam theologians. Kalam theologians wished to lend philosophical respectability to the teachings of the Quran. Thus, they sought to demonstrate with philosophical proofs that the world was created at some point in the finite past. So they're taking issue with Aristotle, for instance, who had suggested that the universe was eternal and had no beginning in time. And so they want to show Aristotle was wrong. Well, that was actually what John Philoponus was trying to do as well. To this end, these Kalam theologians borrowed a line of argument from Philoponus, the last great champion of creation ex nihilo in the pre-Islamic era, which he presented in a work he called Contra Aristotelem, again, against Aristotle. Now, he is not well known to us, but he was well known to the Islamicists as a source of much of the Kalam argumentation against Aristotle's conception of the eternality of the world. So, like their Christian predecessor, Philoponus, the Islamicists believe that the universe was created by God at some point in the finite past, and they sought philosophical justification for this theological view. The early arguments go something like this. Motion cannot be from eternity, for an infinite temporal regress of motion is impossible, since an infinite cannot be traversed. What do they mean by that? Well, imagine a staircase, the top of which you cannot see, and someone has descended it and tells you that the staircase is infinitely long, and he has traversed the whole of it. Well, that's impossible. However many steps he may have descended, it must be a finite number of steps from where he started to where he and you are now. The thinking is that the arrow of time is this traveler, and the moments of time are the step. For the arrow of time to meet us today, it must only be a finite number of moments between now and the beginning of time. Otherwise, the arrow of time couldn't be reaching us at this time. It would still be traveling an infinite number of steps yet to be finished. During the Middle Ages, the Islamic Kalam theologians and Jewish and Christian philosophers and theologians offered numerous arguments attempting to establish the temporal finitude of the universe. Contemporarily, advocates of the Kalam are more likely to rely on science to establish the truth of the second premise. Nevertheless, the metaphysical possibility of an infinite past remains an issue within philosophy, regardless of what physics can or cannot tell us about its actuality. So the Kalam cosmological arguments contemporarily will borrow from Big Bang theory to try to bolster the acceptance of the second premise, the universe had a beginning. But even before the Big Bang theory came about, there were philosophical arguments that tried to establish that the second premise was true. And even if the Big Bang theory falls out of favor with science, there will remain philosophical arguments for thinking that the universe can only be finitely old. Now, the vertical form of the cosmological argument is a bit more difficult to understand because it not only shows that God had to have a cause or a chain of causes at the beginning, but that he must be still causing things now. This version of the cosmological argument that Aquinas argues for, and we will be taking up next. So we'll spend some more time with Aquinas' argument in a bit, but I'll sketch it out here. I'll sketch out the cosmological argument that uses existence of contingent things as its starting place. So again, this is going to be a brief sketch, which we'll look at in greater detail in subsequent lectures. Again, we begin by noting that things exist, right? An unassailable empirical fact, right? Things, how do I know? Well, look, here's a hand, there's the, right? Oh my gosh, there's a computer, right? So things exist. Next, while we often tend to think of existence as a property that things just sort of own, that once something is created, existence is just part of what it is, what contemporary philosopher Edward Feser terms existential inertia. But this is not actually the case. Consider my dog, my former dog. I'm afraid I lost my dog last year, but this is an old presentation. So consider my former dog, right? One might define my dog as black and brown with a waggly tail and 4 legs and 2 eyes and a low IQ. But no matter how detailed my definition or description of my dog is, Notice what is not part of that definition: existence. In fact, remember, this was crucial to Kant's criticism of Anselm's first formulation of the ontological argument. Kant, remember, says that existence is not a descriptive predicate. It doesn't describe a thing. So no matter how well a thing is described, no matter how detailed I understand a thing's essence, that in and of itself doesn't tell me whether it exists or not. This definition of my dog would be cogent if my dog did not exist. Therefore, my dog's nature, what he is, does not guarantee that he is. We might say that his essence does not include his existence, his esse, his being. Like unicorns, we can know what they are, but that does not make them exist. Because it is not part of my dog's or unicorns or President Obama's nature, essence, to exist, esse. Things must be made to exist, if they exist at all, by something else that already does exist. Thus, my dog is caused to exist by something else. More strictly, my dog's essence, this description, is being given its existence, its esse. He has derivative being. He is a being held in being by another. But notice that infinite regress issue rejoining us now. If there is something with derivative existence, then there must be something with underived existence. If there is something that has being bestowed upon it, there must be some source of being which is capable of bestowing being, but doesn't need to borrow it from something else. Now, this thing that causes my dog to exist, either itself is being caused to exist, or it is not. Either it too has derivative existence, or it does not. If the former, we begin the regress again. Thus, the only thing that can terminate the infinite regress of things with derivative being would be an entity with underived being, something whose very existence, whose very essence, rather, whose very essence it was to exist. Therefore, we can know that there is something that does not need to be given existence. Again, since anything that does exist derives, anything we notice, anything we see, anything we observe has derivative existence, we can therefore be assured that there must be something which is the source of that derivative existence, something of underived existence, a thing which has existence as part of its nature, a necessary being, one which must exist, giving everything else its existence. This definition of my dog, oh, I think I say that, yes, right. Yeah. I think I'm just repeating myself here. Now, this thing that causes my dog to exist, either itself, am I repeating myself yet again? Yes, I am. All right, moving on. And that all men call God. Maybe I was just going for the joke. Now, applying this example to everything in the universe, does anything in the universe exist on its own? Well, no, not as far as we can tell. As far as we can tell, everything we have ever encountered has nothing, rather. Nothing we have ever encountered has necessary existence. As David Hume rightly says, anything that I've encountered, I could imagine as non-existing, which suggests that it's contingent. It's being given existence by something else. Everything that we've encountered directly is the sort of thing that could fail to exist, could be on the non-exist side of the line. As Hume puts it, anything I can imagine as existing, we can imagine as not existing. So we have no empirical commerce with necessary existing things in the ordinary mundane world, rather. Nevertheless, Aquinas and others argues that there must be more to reality than what we witness via our senses to cause what we witness via our senses. So our experience of the world leads us logically to posit what we don't experience. We experience contingent beings, but the very existence of contingent beings leads us to posit the existence of a necessary being. We know via the cosmological argument that there must be a necessary thing, a necessary being. So not only did the universe have to have a first cause to get started, that's the upshot of the horizontal cosmological arguments, the universe needs something at this very moment to give it its own existence right now. In other words, creation isn't over. Creation is an ongoing, sustaining process of the uncaused cause. The only thing that would not have to be given existence is a thing that exists by its own nature. It is existence. It is the act of pure being, as Aquinas puts it, that gerund. So being not as a substance that is static, but being as this dynamic process, right? Like swimming is a process, running is a process, and being is a process. This something would always exist, have no cause, have no beginning, no end, have no limit, and be outside time and be infinite. And that's something we would call God. All right, so that's the nature of cosmological arguments. How do I stop sharing? I think this way. How do I stop sharing? Well, I don't know how to stop sharing, but I'm going to stop sharing a little bit simply by concluding this meeting. And hopefully you found this helpful and useful. Naturally, if you have any questions, please let me know. Be happy to talk with you about them. And until next time, have a pleasant rest of your day.